This is Autoline Daily, the show dedicated to enthusiasts of the global automotive industry. The U.S. Senate voted to repeal California's waiver that allows it to set its own vehicle emission standards, which also blocks the state's plan to end sales of ICE-only vehicles by 2035. The bill now heads to President Trump's desk for his signature. California's mandate was adopted by 11 other states, but automakers and dealers lobbied hard to get rid of it because they say the goals aren't achievable and will limit consumer choice. And while they celebrated the vote, the battle isn't over yet. California Governor Gavin Newsom announced that the state is filing a lawsuit because it claims Congress doesn't have the legal authority to rescind the waiver. Earlier this year, the Government Accountability Office said the waivers can't be repealed using the Congressional Review Act. But Republicans in Congress did that anyway, which is setting up this legal battle. And the Senate didn't stop at light-duty vehicles. It also revoked California's plan for stricter emission regulations for heavy-duty trucks, which the EPA approved in 2023. And that's not the only legal battle involving electric vehicles. Earlier this month, California and 16 other states filed a lawsuit over the Transportation Department freezing $5 billion in funds that Congress approved during the Biden administration for EV chargers. And yesterday, the Government Accountability Office ruled that it was illegal for the Transportation Department to withhold those funds because the administration can't block funding approved by Congress. Toyota Chairman Akio Toyoda is winning back support from investors and shareholders. Over the last several years, concerns of his governance have been growing. Toyota was caught falsely certifying vehicles by the Japanese government, and some investors felt the company was dragging its feet on EVs. So his approval started to fall. In 2022, 96% of shareholders voted to keep Akio in his role, but last year, that dropped to 72%. However, two of the investment firms that had urged shareholders to vote him out a year ago are now changing their tune. ISS and Glass Lewis are now recommending that shareholders reappoint Akio when the company holds its annual meeting in June. And why not? Toyota has the highest profit margins and quality ratings of any of the full-line automakers in the world. GM, Ford, and Stellantis are really ticked off that cars imported to the U.S. from the UK only face a 10% tariff, while the vehicles that they import from Canada and Mexico face a 25% tariff. They say that puts U.S. manufacturers at a disadvantage. But auto analyst Michael Robinette with S&P Global Mobility tells Automotive News that the tariffs on Canada and Mexico will probably drop to the same 10% level that the UK has. He says the UK was just the first in line to negotiate with the Trump administration. And Chris Fuel, CEO of the Chrysler and Alfa Romeo brands at Stellantis, predicts that if the tariff issue with Canada and Mexico can be resolved quickly, then the rest of 2025 will be strong. Speaking of tariffs, the EU put a wide range of tariffs on Chinese EVs to prevent them from swamping the European market. But those tariffs don't apply to gasoline or hybrid vehicles, including plug-in hybrids. So in April, sales of Chinese cars in Europe shot up 79% and doubled their market share to 4.6%. And even with the tariffs, sales of Chinese EVs were up 41% to more than 16,400 cars. According to numbers from Dataforce, BYD, Chery, and MG led the way. About 100,500 EVs were sold in the U.S. in April, according to Cox Automotive. That was down nearly 6% from last month, but automakers like GM, Nissan, and Tesla were able to increase sales. Tesla's market share, which sits a little below 50%, went up by 3.7% last month, thanks to selling over 25,000 units of the Model Y. GM also gained EV market share in the U.S., which now sits at 14.4%, up 2% from last year. And for the entire first quarter, GM's EV sales were up 94% to just under 32,000 units, which makes it the number 2 EV seller in the U.S., ahead of Ford and Hyundai.
developing today's vehicles, issues can happen in an instant. When's the best time to solve a problem? The minute you know you have one. Meet Wireless NeoVi Cloud, your secure, off-the-shelf solution empowering real-time collaboration for quick resolution. With Wireless NeoVi Cloud, your team can prevent issues before they can escalate. Driver communication data and remote diagnostics to analyze and resolve your problems using OTA, allowing your executives oversight throughout the process. Wireless NeoVi Cloud, your vehicle update solution in production and on the road. Intrepid Control Systems, driven by your data.
Chinese EV maker Xiaomi saw success with its very first model, the SU7, now having sold nearly 260,000 examples in just over a year. But recently it's come under a lot more scrutiny, mainly triggered by a fatal accident involving one of its vehicles operating in hands-free driving mode. However, it hopes to turn things around, starting with the introduction of its very first SUV, the U7. The model is just slightly larger than the new Tesla Model Y and is based on Xiaomi's 800-volt architecture called Modena. There's two battery sizes available that provide ranges between 760 kilometers or about 470 miles for the top range all-wheel drive version and 835 kilometers or roughly 515 miles of range for rear drive models. Those rear drive models make about 315 horsepower, while there's two all-wheel drive outputs of nearly 500 horsepower and a max version that makes 680 horsepower, which launches the U7 from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 3.2 seconds. Tesla doesn't have a version of the Model Y with that kind of performance, but the others are about the same. The Y has less range than the U7 as well, but the U7 has a bigger battery pack, so it's also heavier and less efficient. The interior is dominated by a large center display screen, and while there's no driver cluster, a long thin screen sits on top of the dash at the base of the windshield. Xiaomi says the U7 is scheduled to go on sale in China in July, and Car News China reports that there's already scalpers trying to sell build slots online for as much as $2,700. Automakers operating in the U.S. face lawsuits and litigation unlike any other country, and certain counties and cities in the U.S. are practically lawsuit factories. Los Angeles and Orange County have the distinction of filing more lawsuits against automakers than anywhere else in the world. So it must be sweet revenge for the Ford Motor Company to file a racketeering lawsuit against 3 law firms in California, led by the Knight Law Group. It says they conducted a massive scheme to, quote, deceive California judges, dupe their own clients, and to defraud auto manufacturers. Ford's investigation uncovered over $100 million worth of fraudulent claims and overbilling. One attorney billed for 57.5 hours that he allegedly worked in one day. Another billed for 34 hours he supposedly worked in one day. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. All told, the law firms have filed 5,000 lawsuits against Ford and other automakers. RICO, or the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, was enacted in 1970 to fight organized crime. And by filing a RICO lawsuit, Ford could be awarded triple damages. Used car prices are back on the rise, and it's not just because of tariffs. According to Edmunds, the average transaction price of used vehicles 3 years or less in the first quarter was over $30,000 for the first time since 2023. The increase is mostly due to the chip shortage caused by the pandemic, which resulted in lower supplies of new cars. Leasing also declined in 2022 and 2023, which means there are fewer 3-year-old vehicles returning to dealers now. So, because there are fewer used vehicles in inventory, prices are going up. Edmunds also says that it expects tariffs could cause new vehicle inventory to shrink, which will cause a similar shortage of used vehicles in the next few years that we're seeing now. And that means even higher prices. Rivian has already revealed the all-new R2, but it's still having a little fun with the camo wraps for test models. I'm sure you remember those boring old wraps that automakers used to put on vehicles. Over the last 10 years or so, we have seen some more interesting designs, but they're usually a combination of black and white geometric patterns. Not Rivian, though. It has much more brightly colored wraps that take inspiration from the outdoors and even children's books. And I'm willing to bet that some customers would actually like this on their own vehicle. But that's a wrap for today's show and this week. And as a reminder, we'll be off on Monday for the Memorial Day holiday. So I'll see you back here on Tuesday. And thanks, and I hope that you have a great weekend.
Autoline Daily is brought to you by Intrepid Control Systems. Over-the-air engineering boost your game. Teijin Automotive Technologies, the formula for better mobility. And by
There's nothing wrong with heavy metal.
Hey, lighten up.
But with world-class composite material, Teijin Automotive Technologies makes vehicles lighter, safer, and more eco-friendly.
Wards is the industry leader for news, data, and analysis. That's why companies across the globe subscribe to our premium service, maybe even your own. Log in for subscriber access now. Check your company's intranet for details, and rely on wardsauto.com to keep you informed.